So what I want to do now is take a series of examples to see how the Pinkerton doctrine might play out. Let's suppose that A, B, and C meet together and decide to commit a string of residential burglaries. Burglaries are the underlying target offense. That's what they're intending to commit, and they have a meeting of the minds on this. Following their meeting, A secures a map of the neighborhood and drives around the streets to see which homes would be easy to hit. This is our starting hypothetical. At this point in the hypothetical, we would say that A and B and C have committed a conspiracy, which is an agreement between two or more guilty minds with the specific intent to commit a target offense. The word decide is important. It tells us that there's a meeting of the minds. They've had this meeting of the minds to commit the burglaries, and we can see that they have the specific intent to commit the same crime. It doesn't matter that we don't know who solicited whom, who started it off. Our movie opens up with them being charged with conspiracy for that decision. But in most jurisdictions, this isn't sufficient to convict of conspiracy. Remember, there's a third requirement. That is an overt act to prove or cement the conspiracy. That overt act that comes in after the agreement and the intent. It doesn't have to be undertaken by each conspirator, so A and B and C don't have to do overt acts. One overt act by one co-conspirator can bind them all. A small act is going to suffice. Here, when A secured a map of the neighborhood and drove around to see which houses to hit, he committed an overt act to cement the conspiracy for all three parties. All right, now we've found the substantive crime of conspiracy. Remember, this crime never merges with crimes that follow. Whatever happens, there's going to be one count of conspiracy and separate counts for crimes that take place after this. Okay, first up is the following extension of the hypothetical. Let's suppose that A steals a car to use for the burglaries. After all, you can't effectively run a string of burglaries on foot. Can you imagine lugging the computers and TV sets out from houses? You're going to need a car. All right, so A has stolen the car. We would say that A is the perpetrator of the theft of that car. He did the actus reus of the theft. He took and carried away the car. Now the question is whether B and C, his co-conspirators, are also guilty of stealing the car. After all, they didn't do that stealing. To determine that, we need to consider the Pinkerton doctrine's analysis. The doctrine states that once a conspiracy can be proven, which we did here, we ask whether the theft of the car flowed from the conspiracy's objective, either because it was in furtherance of the conspiracy, or within the scope of the conspiracy, or was reasonably foreseeable from the conspiracy. Here, we could argue that the theft of the car was in furtherance of the conspiracy's criminal objective. It advanced the objective of the burglaries. Stealing the car wasn't specifically contemplated by the perpetrators, but A's theft helped the group commit their target offense. So all three are going to be guilty of the theft of that car, even though A is the only one who stole it. Next example. Let's suppose that A and B drive to that first house to burglarize. C stayed home, but he's going to be instrumental in their partnership because he's going to be fencing or selling off what A and B steal from the houses. So A and B have pulled up to the first house. B stays in the car to act as a lookout, while A breaks in and starts to unplug the stereo, take everything. A is guilty of burglary, breaking and entering with the intent to commit a crime inside. We know that because A has committed the actus reus of breaking and entering with that specific intent, he's committed the burglary. What about B and C? Are they also guilty of the burglary? The Pinkerton doctrine would say absolutely. B and C as co-conspirators should be guilty of the burglary, even though they didn't perpetrate the crime. C at home doesn't matter. B in the car doesn't matter. Why are they guilty? They're guilty because burglary was specifically contemplated, and so we would say, under Pinkerton, it's within the scope of the conspiratorial objective. And it never matters that B or C never broke into the house. They're just like Daniel and Pinkerton. It's irrelevant whether they actually commit the target offense. They're guilty vicariously through their association of the partnership. Now let's look at the next example. There's A, he's inside the house burglarizing it, B sitting in the car acting as a lookout, and C is back at his own house. What what happens if A kills the homeowner while he's burglarizing it? We know that A is going to be guilty of the homeowner's death. Probably the first kind of criminal homicide or theory that came to your mind was felony murder, that during the course of burglary, this inherently dangerous felony, A directly caused the death of the homeowner. Okay? That's the name of the crime, felony murder. Now my question for you is, are B and C guilty of that murder as well? The answer under the Pinkerton doctrine is yes. The reasoning is going to depend upon the partner's understanding. It could be considered reasonably foreseeable. After all, burglaries are inherently dangerous, and a death that flows from that burglary is reasonably foreseeable. So that could be one way to analyze it under Pinkerton. Whether it's a homeowner who's killed, a neighbor intervening, or a police officer responding, B and C will be derivatively liable for the killing by A. It could also be that we might decide that the murder was committed in furtherance of the burglary. That is, in order to carry out the burglary successfully, to get away, to escape. It advances the criminal objective for A to have killed the homeowner, so maybe it was in furtherance of. Well, you might be thinking, what if everyone agrees that there won't be violence? Nobody's going to die, no guns, no violence, that was their motto. We say, tough luck, too bad. If we conclude that the death was reasonably foreseeable, that it was going to follow from a burglary, B and C are going to be responsible even if they never knew that A was going to bring a gun into the house, even if they told A, please don't kill anybody. It's the partnership that created the liability. Again, for our purposes, I'm not a stickler for putting these crimes in specific categories under the Pinkerton doctrine, but this is how the analysis might look as you decide which crime fits which category. Notice that in considering B and C's responsibility for the crimes that A committed, we're not analyzing the theft or the burglary or the murder. We're not saying, B, are you responsible for theft, and then going through all the elements of theft, or describing felony murder under B's responsibility. We do that when we consider whether our perpetrator, A, is guilty. In the case of B and C, we're focusing very narrowly only on the notion of derivative or vicarious liability. Can this non-perpetrator still be guilty for the murder without having committed it? That's why we're using the Pinkerton doctrine. Here's one final example out of this hypothetical. What if, while A's in the home burglarizing it to steal, he rapes the homeowner? Well, we know A is guilty of that rape because he committed the actus reus of that unlawful intercourse with the accompanying mens rea. Now the question is, would B and C also be guilty of the rape by virtue of being co-conspirators? In this example, we might see the limitation of the Pinkerton doctrine. To find vicarious or derivative liability, we have three possibilities that extend it. Is the crime within the scope of the conspiracy, in furtherance of the conspiracy, or reasonably foreseeable from the conspiracy? Without more facts, none of these seem to fit. This crime doesn't seem to flow out of a partnership of burglaries to steal. This looks like something that A did on his own. It wasn't specifically contemplated, nor did it advance the burglary, nor was it reasonably foreseeable. So B and C won't be guilty of that rape under the Pinkerton doctrine. But could you change the facts slightly so that they are guilty of the rape? I suppose I could imagine that if A had previously been convicted of home invasion robberies and rapes, this might make it reasonably foreseeable to B and C that when they became partners with A, he might be doing rapes. Then B and C might be guilty for a rape that A committed, because then and only then might it be reasonably foreseeable to assume that A might commit the rape.